Chapter 31 Bluebell Bela. Perchance the gods had been angered, since of late nothing was going right. The death of the little princess was felt throughout Dragonstone. This was only the latest travesty Bela was made to suffer these days. Because Jason was betrothed to Helena, and Bela was shoved onto Aegon without warning. Bela always knew she'd marry the prince and move to the Red Keep, but this wasn't what her father promised. Jace and Bela were supposed to be Jaehaerys the Conciliator and good Queen Elisane come again, just as they talked of for years. Their life would have been wonderful, Bela as the lovely queen to her handsome king husband, and surrounded by their dragon-riding children. Bela would name their first daughter Princess Lena, and their son might claim Vhagar. She would be Queen of Westeros and live in the Red Keep, hosting lords and holding women's court. That future had been within reach, but then in the span of a council meeting it had been ripped away. How could her father do this to her? Isn't that what he always wanted? For his daughter to be queen and their future descendants as the kings of Westeros. Her father was the king's brother, the rogue prince himself. He should have stopped it. Bela was so angry she'd refused to talk to him for weeks, though maybe he'd failed to notice, occupied as he was, preparing for her upcoming wedding. Bela mourned the little princess too, she truly did, but frail babes dying in their cribs wasn't rare, especially in winter. So when Bela wasn't occupied with concerns for the princess's family, she felt overwhelmed by her own burdens. It's unjust, that's what it is. Unfair. And it drives me mad everyone else is refusing to acknowledge it. Why can't you ever take my side, Rhaena? Bela asked her sister while getting into bed, quickly slipping her feet under the woolen blankets. The floors were unpleasantly chilly to tread on with exposed toes. I am on your side, Bela, but I'm trying to remind you something good can yet come of this, Rhaena said, leaving the curtains of their four-poster slightly ajar, allowing the warm light of the fireplace to slip through. What good can come of this transgression? Helena would get Westeros, Rhaena would get Driftmark, and Bela would get Aegon. The only consolation was that at least it wasn't Aemond. You used to have a dragon whilst I did not, Rhaena said quietly, propping her back to rest against the pillows and hugging her blankets to her chest. I spent years praying nightly for my egg to hatch, to gain a dragon as splendid as Moondancer for myself. I felt passed over by the gods and father alike. Only mother understood. But I had to wait my due, all the while fearing I'd never be a dragon rider like the rest of our family until Hagrid came along. And then, within a few moons I had Ebryon. At this, Bela thought back to her visit in the capital, and the other thing that felt wrong of late. Bela had stood in the window of the Red Keep when Vhagar returned from the north carrying her new rider. She'd grown up watching her mother fly Vhagar, and could recognize that dragon even as a mere dot in the distant clouds. So to learn Hagrid was Vhagar's new rider was akin to a slap to the face and a cutting betrayal. Hagrid was only in Westeros by invitation of the royal family. Their parents, their mother, Vhagar's true rider, had welcomed Hagrid and Hariel with open arms when they had nowhere else, and was being chased through the hills of Norvos. He'd given them shelter, station, and assisted with language. Hagrid and Hariel owed everything to Bela's family. How dare Hagrid spit on Lena's memory, to steal something that was never his by birthright, birthplace, or blood? Hariel's unsympathetic response made it worse, as if she believed Hagrid hadn't done anything wrong, and Bela was the one overreacting. And perchance she was, if only slightly, but had Hariel no compassion? Bela could understand Rhaena's point though. The king had pardoned Hagrid, and Bela had known him for years too. Hagrid had probably been short-sighted and worried. It didn't justify the thefts, not in the slightest, but she could understand better how it came to be. He'd sworn to never ride Vhagar again either, and once she'd calmed down and talked with her sister, Bela had chosen to forgive him. That was days later though, and in the meanwhile Ariel never came to explain herself. She kept away, and the few times Bela saw her she was dressed differently, basking in the court's admiration gained through her shiny starlit gowns. Magics she'd never revealed before, while prancing around to keep accompanying Helena. Was Bela being replaced? Because the days passed and Harold didn't seem to care that Bela was hurt. Ebrion was worth the wait, sister, Reyna said. Even if I could change things, I wouldn't have it any different. I'm not getting a dragon, I'm getting Aegon. Reyna arched a brow. You know what I mean, she exclaimed, her mind still on Harold's behavior over the last few moons. What was going on with her? Though it was hard to imagine a lackwit like Helena capable, Bela nearly suspected the princess had been manipulating Ariel, twisting her into one of the princess's agreeable little puppets, because Bela hardly recognized her during the weeks in the capital. Ariel didn't fly northwards, even sending her away. She didn't jest during lessons or put people in their place when they deserved it. Except making her gowns pretty, she hardly used magic, nor did she sneak into the kitchen to steal food or go to the garrison to look at the weapons. It wasn't before Bela's life fell to pieces that Ariel finally came to her senses. Her father had barely shared the news before she knocked on her door, which in hindsight was a peculiar timing, but Bela ignored it, because whilst everything was so horribly wrong, at least Ariel was back. She'd remained with Bela, listened to her fears with compassion unlike anyone else afforded her. Then the next day came and Ariel was still there. They were friends and talking again, yet at the same time there was a distance. Bela couldn't put her finger on it, but it seemed Ariel was pulling away. Even Reyna had felt the distance from Ariel, despite how the two had never argued to begin with. The issue was clear though. This was Helena's fault. Maybe all the king's younger children shared some blame too. They spoiled everything, so Bela assumed things would return to normal between them once back at Dragonstone. That hadn't quite happened. Even though Ariel was always with them, she seemed distracted and oftentimes irate. Bela would almost claim she was angry with her. That couldn't be right. She'd never wronged Ariel. Bela's thoughts were spiraling to dark places again. Despite the dim light within the curtains of their bed, Reyna could effortlessly perceive Bela's thoughts as plainly as if they were words out of her mouth, and her twin let out a sigh. You're so angry of late, Bela, Reyna said. You're angry at father, angry at the king, at Princess Helena and Hand, angry at Aegon, Jace, Luke, Aemond, Hagrid and Ariel. You're angry at me for trying to help and grandmother for not helping enough. Instead of nursing your ire over something that can be changed, perhaps you can try to make the best of it. The best of this? The alternative is to keep being angry. And Bela, this wrath doesn't suit you. I want to see you laugh again. Bela dragged a hand through her thick Valyrian curls. Aegon is one thing. I don't know him and I never cared to before. But after we're married, I have to live there, Reyna, Bela whispered. I have to live in her castle, attend her court, watch her marry my Jace, and live the life that should have been mine. It's keeping up the puppetry of being happy for them was hard enough during those brief weeks before we returned home, but that is to be the rest of my life. Bela couldn't do it. She just couldn't stand it, and there could have been a way to avoid her unfair fate. Back in the day, Alysanne and Jaehaerys had been forced to marry in secret because their mother and council plotted to tear them apart. They'd snuck off to Dragonstone to marry before the Queen Dowager could force Alysanne on the Baratheons, afraid as they'd been in those days that another sibling marriage between a Targaryen king and his sister would renew the wrath of the faith. Jaehaerys had taken Alysanne for his queen and sister wife regardless, kept it quiet for a few years until Alysanne turned 6 and 10, and it had gone perfectly well. So why couldn't that have been Bela and Jace's story too? They could marry in secret, and once it was done, no one could tear them apart. Not Helena, nor her father, Aegon, or even the king. Not anyone. Except Luke. And now, with Luke breathing down his brother's neck, Jacaerys had been forced to avoid Baela for the sake of her reputation. That horrible brat who dared name her an unfaithful whore. Who in the seven else did he think he was talking to? How was Baela unfaithful for sticking by Jace through thick and thin? If needed be, Baela would fly into war for him. So how did her unshakable devotion make her a whore? That night she'd only meant to share her plans with Jace, because it had been impossible before. Back at the Red Keep there had been uncountable strangers, secret passages, and their chambers were too far apart. So Baela awaited their return to Dragonstone. The logistics was more feasible there. With some privacy she could both tell him her plan and remind him why she was superior to Helena. Curse Luke! You ruined everything! At least Hariel had kept quiet. But Baela hadn't expected anything else. She'd always been reliable that way. Rhaena's eyes softened. You can join us at Driftmark. You will always be welcome there. You, Aegon, your dragons, and any children. Baela's chest burned at the suggestion of being made to seek refuge in her sister's castle. She was the firstborn. I deserve a stronghold, to be the lady of my husband's castle, a dragon rider and partner to his rule. I'm the blood of the dragon. This was my birthright, and it's being stolen out from underneath me. The words spilled out, finally expressing the bubbling fury she couldn't escape. And for what? How will Helena make a better queen than myself? Everyone insists it's an advantageous match, that their marriage will heal the rift in the family. But what about everything else that comes with that station? Are you all blind to it? Helena doesn't love Jace. She doesn't care about him. And she'll make a terrible queen. Baela, Rhaena admonished. Our cousin is a princess, and she's courteous and sweet. She's weak, Baela snapped. I can't fathom how she's Princess Rhaenyra's sister or ever claimed a dragon. A goat earns more respect than Lackwitz, and everyone can tell she's one, that she's not right in the head. But the queen has ordered people not to speak aloud what we all see plainly with our eyes. Helena is not fit to plan a feast, far less run a castle. Can you imagine how Helena will handle the Red Keep? She'd sooner hold court for spiders than ladies. She's unnatural, and she'll make a mockery of Jace's rule. Making Helena queen placates no one except the Hightowers. But I'm the better option for the rest of the kingdom. I'd fight for my subjects, and advise my husband with wisdom and justice. I'd be more than a broodmare made to squeeze out heirs. You'd have made an excellent queen, Baela, Rhaena said, hugging her sister tight. But you're betrothed to another, and so is Jacaerys. Baela wrestled Rhaena's arms off her, pushing her sister to her side of the bed. I don't need reminding. It's only a moon left to your wedding. Try, Baela. Even if it's not better for the realm, then at least for your own sake, so you will be happy. Come morning, Baela was once again faced with the aftermath of Emma's death. The shock had passed, but the absence lingered. Their grandmother didn't show to break her fast. Luke poked unenthusiastically at his food. The weather was as dark and dreary as the mood within Dragonstone Castle, coming down in sludge and wind. The poor weather meant they were not only having to suffer Emma's loss, but suffer cousin Aemon's continued presence as well, whilst Uncle Laenor was breaking his fast with a goblet of strong wine on the side. Aemon's wisely waiting out the weather, and I hope you're too, Sir Laenor. You're not going flying today, are you? Hagrid asked, eyeing Uncle's beverage. People got careless when they were too deep in their cups, and even if Uncle Laenor was an excellent dragon rider, born to cross skies and seas alike, it seemed unnecessarily reckless. No, it's the day of the smith, was Uncle Laenor's response, mentioning the importance of the date. The holiday of peasants and labourers. He held up his goblet in a mocking toast. To the small folk, the builders of the future, those who have one, at any rate. Sir Laenor wasn't the only one using the small folk as a distraction, and when Heriel suggested Bela and Reyna join her for an errand in the village that afternoon, they had agreed. It was supposed to be a quick, simple affair, but Reyna insisted he take an escort into the village, and unfortunately, Aemond and Luke ended up volunteering. The two people within the castle Bela'd rather avoid. As Luke and Aemond were only children themselves, and good for nothing but judging Bela from their high horse, the King's Guard Sir Stefan came along too. They'd huddled up in their warmest clothes and set out as the afternoon waned. Bela needed to take her minds off matters, and a trip to visit a peasant was just the sort of odd nonsense Heriel would cook up. Reyna was more skeptical, but it's not as if they were visiting Flea Bottom, just the cottages down in the village. They'd literally walked there 1,000 times on their way to the pier. At the tail end of the group, Lucerys and Sir Stefan discussed tourneys, whilst Reyna and Bela strolled arm in arm following after Aemond and Heriel.
"Is that Uncle Laenor?" Reyna pointed down the alley to a pale-haired man accompanied by a shorter one. On Dragonstone, having silver hair didn't immediately mean they were of House Velaryon or Targaryen. It could be anyone, but the man had a familiar gait. The shadows cast by the low angle of the setting sun made it hard to tell, but the cloak was similar to the one their uncle arrived in yesterday. The two turned up by a door and disappeared into a crowded tavern at the corner of the alley.
"It could be," Bela agreed, wondering who his companion was. If that had been Uncle Laenor, the other man wasn't anyone Bela recognized. He'd been too short to be Sir Carl. "I wonder how the princess is faring," her sister murmured. Bela hummed thoughtfully, wondering that as well. Uncle Laenor had left his wife to deal with her grief alone. It seemed unfair, as while her family was on Dragonstone, their princess had only the Lannisters and the Hightowers for comfort as she grieved the death of her daughter. "This is quite unnecessary," Aemond told Heriel ahead of him. "It's the day of the smith. Had it been summer, there'd be festivities on the street, but instead they keep indoors," Heriel said. "I can improve some of those indoor spaces, and it costs me nothing." "As long as you're aware this kindness will not be repaid," Aemond responded, and then reached out and took Heriel's hand. He didn't link her elbow through his, but intertwined their fingers. A wistful sigh sounded from her sister. Reyna peeked hopefully towards her betrothed, just as Luke imitated being felled by a lance while Sir Stefan laughed heartily. Bela gazed moonwards. She was surrounded by idiots. How could Reyna think that romantic? Aemond was hopelessly awkward, looking rigidly straight ahead whilst Heriel glanced down at her joined hands. Bela was sure she'd have requested the use of her hand back if possible without slighting his fragile ego. Heriel was forced to suffer his presence because she had no other choice, just like Bela had no other choice. Chase had told her how unpleasant Aemond was as a child, and from what Bela had observed, he hadn't changed. Aemond was judgmental, boring and rude. Her cousin had no sense of humor and quite unlikable. He tried to hide those traits from Heriel, but surely she was clever enough to see through his memory. At least Aegon had a sense of humor. The older brother was quite charming and better looking compared to Prince Pointyface. Fortunately, Heriel wasn't made to suffer Aemond's grasping hand for long, because once they passed the corner tavern, it led out onto a row of cottages, which was their destination. The village below the Dragon Mount wasn't large, but the islanders were many enough to sustain a few taverns, barns, granary, wells, peasant cottages, a weathered little inn at the stony pier, and a local whorehouse. Dragonstone had been an outpost of Valyria once, and it reflected in the small folk the same it did on Driftmark. The majority carried Valyrian features, a blend of white and blonde hair with purple or blue eyes. Bela had heard many were dragon seeds too, the descendants of the bastards sired from illicit dalliances by long-dead Targaryen lords and princes, and seeing the babe of Heriel's personal mate and a stable hand hammered in this fact effectively. The infant girl, Ariel, had fine silver hair and dusky lilac eyes. She had a white nose, round eyes, and a mouth set naturally in a pout, giving her a surprised expression. Just as her parents and her brothers, Ariel looked quite Valyrian. She shared many traits with Visenya at that age, but even though their coloring was similar, that's where the likeness ended. Alisa the maid had been overwhelmed to open her front door, at most expecting Heriel along with an escort, but instead found half the royal family from the nearby castle. Though she had actually met everyone during their years at the castle, Alisa had been flustered while inviting them inside, spluttering repeatedly apologies for the state of her dreary little cottage. Plain, bleak and cramped, the cottage was nearing a dilapidated state, yet Bela found something fascinating about the differences. To think peasants could survive this way. It had a strange smell, wet and salty, and held few belongings. There wasn't much here to look at, yet Bela's gaze kept flickering around. It was a little exciting too, and it left Bela musing if Flea Bottom was like this as well. She'd heard it was even worse there, but that was hard to believe. What could be worse than this? Reyna did not share her fascination though, and stood uncomfortably just inside the door whilst Harriel finished up her errand. Not that her placement made much of a difference. The cottage was only 2 rooms large. "That takes care of the draft," Harriel said. She'd used magic to fix a small gap between the walls and the window frame that had previously been plugged with straws. "Bless you, milady. I can't thank you enough, milady," Alisa said, pulling the raggedy blanket snugly around her daughter. Harriel hadn't been there long, but with a few flicks of magic the home was already much improved. The fireplace was burning with magic fire that had lasted days. The broken bar in the crypt was mended, and it felt warmer and more welcoming despite its humbling size. Whilst Harriel showed no sign of disgust or discomfort, the rest stood awkwardly to the side, for once united as a front against the foreigners. Harriel chuckled. "Seeing your daughter well is thanks enough. It's relief after Emma. I was aggrieved to hear of the little princess. Such a tragedy," Alisa said quietly. Harriel hummed slightly in response. "Harriel?" Reyna kept her voice low, but in such a cramped cottage everyone heard it. "Will you be much longer?" "No," Harriel said. "Only a few more things." Reyna nodded. "And I'll be waiting outside." "I'll wait outdoors as well," Eamon said, nose scrunched up. Though Bela would have preferred to remain by the heat of the fireplace, she wouldn't let her sister suffer ailment alone either. Reyna wasn't Harriel, who the princeling was all stiffly awkward smiles for. She'd take the excuse to get away from Luke as well. The prince kept casting her angry or disappointed looks, and she worried he would say something. Whilst Lucerys and Sir Stefan remained inside, they left Harriel to fix Ariel's blanket into something better equipped to hold out the winter. Even if it was unorthodox to do so for a mere maid, it's not as if Harriel was hurting anyone, neither Smallfolk or House Targaryen. Mayhaps it was a natural reaction to aid an infant when it was within her power to do so. Bela could understand the urge, and she felt dreadful and helpless for little Emma too. The loss had been painted stark across her Uncle Laenor's face, and if he was in such a condition, Bela could only imagine Princess Rhaenyra's devastation. The death of the babe reminded Bela of her brother's death too, though he'd never lived and taken their mother with him. The hollowness of her mother's passing was a feeling that had never quite faded. The sting had lessened, but her absence lingered. Especially with everything happening in her life, Bela felt the loss more intimately than she had in years. Grandmother tried her best, and Princess Rhaenyra favored them. But they could never be Laena, her beautiful, gracious mother, whose embrace was safety, whose smile chased away ghosts in the night, and wise advice made a dark day brighten. There was a truth she'd only ever dared whisper to Reyna in the middle of the night, years and years ago. That she wished mother had never been with child, that her little brother had been the death of her, and if he was never made then her mother would still be with him, instead of dying a slow, wasteful, painful death with no glory or honor. Just another common childbed death, where Laena Velaryon had been anything but common. After their discussion the previous eve, Reyna had spent half the night tossing and turning, keeping Bela awake too, and come morning they had left to pray in the sept. The 7 statues within the sept were already alight with candles when they had arrived, and they had lit even more. They were in the sept frequently, though Harriel required the incentive of lessons or someone asking her to join. She wasn't a devout follower of the 7 who are one, but was willing to learn and respect the practices. As a Targaryen, Bela knew a few others who didn't follow the 7, be it her father or Princess Rhaenyra who was drawn to the Valyrian gods of old, but most others followed the new gods. Yet, regardless if they believed or not, they had to participate in the sept that morning. from Heriel to her father to a heavy-lidded Uncle Lenor. First listening to the Sept hold service in honor of the Day of the Smith, followed by Princess Emma, and then for personal prayers. But whom of the 7 to turn to for this? Bela hadn't known when her mother died either. It might be the Smith's day, but praying to the mender of broken things felt a tasteless mockery when Emma was beyond repair. The mother above hadn't graced Emma with her mercy despite being as pure and innocent as the maid. The warrior's sharpest Valyrian steel sword useless defending against the bitter bite of winter. The crone's wisdom fell empty, and had been no protection from the father. Rhaena assisted Joffrey light their candles at the foot of the statue of the mother. Luke and Aemond left theirs by the father. Daemon left the candle by the smith, while Uncle Lenor, Grandmother and Jace did like Bela and left theirs by the maid. But Heriel picked the stranger. No matter how many times she was reminded it wasn't decent to pray to the stranger, Heriel ignored their advice. It wasn't wrong per se, and she'd explained her reasoning several times. The stranger is the outcast, the wanderer from far places, unknown and unknowable. As an orphan foreigner and a witch, I can't think of any aspect of the 7 I relate to more than strangeness. Heriel would sometimes be proper and sit alongside Bela and her sister by the maid, mother, or whichever was suitable for the prayers. Yet when made to pick for herself, more often than not she'd favour the animalistic statue. Though today it actually made sense. Unlike the other 6, only the stranger had paid attention to Princess Emma Velaryon. It cast the infant princess beyond the reach of those who loved her, and claimed Emma for itself. Mayhaps that's why Heriel sought guidance from the stranger. Maybe she too felt beyond the reach of where she'd once belonged. Outside, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, and Bela's warm breath created pale puffs of fog in the brisk evening air. Up the street, a couple 30 patrons entered the corner tavern, where someone was playing music. Neither winter or the death of Princess Emma stopped the peasants from marking the Smith's Day. It was ironic that the day meant to worship the god of labor was celebrated by skirting duties in favor of drink and cheer. I hope Heriel will be swift, Rhaena murmured, pulling her furs close around her neck. I didn't think it'd be so. Regardless, it'd be better to return to the castle. I wonder how they stand living like that. They're a family of 6 and their cottage is smaller than our bedchamber, Bela mused. Is that how they live in King's Landing too? I've walked through the streets but never ventured inside the peasants' homes. It'd be curious to see. Rather you than me, Rhaena teased. Aemond huffed, radiating haughty disapproval and judgment. Do you have an opinion on the subject, cousin? Bela challenged, which earned her a discreet pinch to the hand from Rhaena in warning. If you wish to know the streets of King's Landing, your betrothed would know more than I. Aegon ventures into the city on his own too. What an adventurous and engaged prince he is. Does he explore the city often? Rhaena asked with faked interest. Have you gone with him? Reflexively, Aemond glanced quickly towards the closed door, assured the others were still inside. Once or twice. It nearly sounded uncertain, a rarity for her pompous cousin, and Bela was suddenly suspicious. What part of the city do you prefer most? Rhaena inquired. Yes, where would that be? The streets of silk, perhaps? Bela watched closely for signs of shame. Surely Heriel would want to know if the prince courting her had a favorite brothel, but if anything, Aemond's expression only locked up. Bela couldn't interpret him any more than she could a piece of driftwood. Is that where your mind naturally ventures, cousin? Towards the pleasure houses? A smirk rested on his lips. I should have figured, considering your unladylike habits. Maybe it was inevitable. You're sired by the Lord of Fleabottom after all. Bela's face burst with heat. Rhaena was no longer feigning politeness and eyed Aemond like he was the Harpy incarnate. He acted indifferent to their ire, pointedly glancing up towards the tavern when some drunken hollering drifted down the street. Pardon? Rhaena hissed. How dare he insinuate something so... Aemond had no knowledge of the events that transpired, merely leaping to conclusions from a few overheard words in a hallway. What did you expect it though? He was the son of the Queen, who made a sport of speaking treacherous falsehoods and hurtful gossip.
Well, Ariel's only putting up with your crotchety self because she has to, Bela spat, wanting to hurt him too. The hollering from the tavern finally went ignored, and Eamon looked slowly over his shoulder, expression passive but with keen eyes. He didn't speak, but Bela had his full attention. Your courtship? It's the order of things, and she has no choice. Though just because it's the order of things doesn't mean she wants it so. You're awful at courting, and the first excuse she'll flee. Even if you wed her, don't fool yourself, cousin. She doesn't love you, and she never will. And you will never be enough for Aegon, Eamon said quietly, his purple eyes filled with icy fire. Your children will not lack for siblings, both older and younger than those of your womb. It should suit you rather well, though. You love bastards. Weeks of frustration finally burst to the surface, and ex-Bela charged him, her fist connecting with a painfully satisfying crunch into Eamon's pointy nose. Bela! Rhaena shouted, but there was nothing she could have done when Eamon reacted. Faster than Bela had anticipated, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it around her back and pushed her arm up painfully. Bela groaned. It felt like her arm was about to break. Come at me again and I'll serve you to Vermivor, Eamon threatened, the grip unyielding and blood dripping from his nose. Let her go! Rhaena demanded shrilly. Unhand me or I'll have my dragon burn you alive! Try it. I'm an unburned, you spoiled harlot. Bela laughed cruelly, as if Eamon would have lived if it wasn't for Ariel. She should have let you burn. You're but a fat leech sucking average achievements and passing them as your own. The cottage door burst open and the others stormed into the alley. What the hell are you doing? Stop it! Bela! My prince, Lady Bela! Eamon let go, and for a split second she considered turning around and go for another hit. But Rhaena was pulling her back, and then Luke, Sir Stefan and Ariel were there too. You can't manhandle a lady, my prince! Sir Stefan exclaimed, holding Eamon back with a warning hand on his chest. Uncaring, Eamon dried away the blood with the back of his palm, only succeeding in making the smearing worse. I only restrained the beast running wild. Are you hurt? Rhaena demanded to know whilst Bela clutched her aching arm to her chest. She shook her head. She was fine. What's going on? Hale's green eyes darted from Bela's arm to Eamon's nose. Was that necessary? She's half your size, she asked Eamon. But before he could answer, she turned to Bela. What did you say to make you punch him? Not here, Sir Stefan commanded. Come along, we're returning to the castle. Your family can sort out this disagreement privately, and not on the open streets of Dragonstone. Eamon gritted his teeth, which made Bela smirk. There was no way anyone would take his side, not here. Because of their argument, Bela had ignored the happenings up the street. It was only now Bela realized it was a bit too rowdy, and she wasn't the only one who'd heard. Is that an argument? Harold turned towards the corner tavern, which seemed to be where the sounds originated. Another one? Bela heard yelling and thumps, leaving little room to misunderstand anymore. Aye, sounds like a tavern fight, Sir Stefan said, hand resting on his blade just as the tavern door was wrenched open, and a couple of brawling men spilled into the alley, yelling and bleeding. Rhaena gasped and quickly scurried towards Sir Stefan, who immediately went from being passively on guard to full attention. We'll have to go quickly past it and don't stray. Luke drew his sword while Sir Stefan grabbed Bela so she stood next to her sister, easily within the knight's reach. Aemond had been resting a hand on Ariel's shoulder, but reached for his sword instead. An error in judgment he shouldn't have made because... Ariel! Luke shouted. Sir Lenor is in there, she said. We can't just leave him in a tavern fight. Stop, my lady, Sir Stefan objected. It's too dangerous. Ariel ignored him, dodging around Aemond's grasping hand in a way she needed to teach Bela, and pointed her wand at the fighters. A jet of light streamed from the tip, hitting one of the brawling men. He stiffened up more than Aemond at his most rigid, arms locking tight at his side before toppling over sideways. With his opponent unable to move, the other man took to free accessibility as an incentive to finish the task permanently. No! Ariel growled, and the next rope of magic was the color of starlit blood. The enchantment struck true, the man's eyes rolled back in his skull before collapsing boneless and unmoving. Bela tensed, her sister shrieked, and Luke gasped. Had she... Did you kill him? Eamon breathed, a question taken straight out of Bela's tongue, which baffled Hariel.
No?
She eyed him strangely, because while Luke was unnerved, the weirdo looked like he was about to kiss her.
He snuck out. Several people had come outside to see what was happening, but it was at this moment several more patrons came stumbling outside too.
Halt! Sir Stefan demanded, but went ignored.
There was a plump man in the lead, and Bela wasn't sure what his intentions were. Perhaps he'd been blindly trying to flee, or maybe he was looking for any excuse to fight. It all happened so fast. But the street was narrow, they were all hooped together with fallen bodies blocking the path, and then the plump man ran straight at Luke. Immediately Sir Stefan leapt to assist the prince, but the man wasn't alone, and another came to save him from the knight. Though while Sir Stefan was occupied protecting Luke, Bela and Reyna were left with no protection, and within a blink things turned frightfully tumultuous.
Get the fuck out of... They're part of it!
You're fucking mad! When they see, we'll be dragon father!
It's that way! That's the bleeding prince!
Bela could taste the mob's visceral rage in the sulfur-tainted air. Why weren't they halting? Sir Stefan, Luke and Aemon's demands that they cease went ignored and unheard. If her father was here, surely they would have fallen in line. But he wasn't. And Bela had neither magic, dragon or a blade to defend herself with. Nor did her sister. Reyna screamed and a voice that might have been Hariel bellowed something from across the crowd. Bela punched out wildly when a beefy hand grabbed a fistful of her curls, yanking her painfully from the wall, so Bela shouted. Her roots and knuckles stung, yet the punch had done nothing, but the man collapsed when struck by another flash of red magic. As quickly as it started, Hariel put a stop to it. An ear-piercing sound blared so loudly, surely the dragons in the deepest caves were awoken too. It sounded more as if it was blasted straight into Bela's ears though, a cross between a drum and a sharp horn. It was so awful, everyone was forced to let go of whatever they were holding to cover their ears. The sound finally ended and was overlapped by Hariel's furious roar of "I said stand down! Draconivores!" In a fog of solidifying magic, Hariel created a brand new dragon. It was no bigger than a small dog, but it shone red and gold, and Bela had never seen it before. What in the seven? How had she? Since when could Hariel birth dragons from magic alone? Don't make me grow this dragon to full size, Hariel threatened. It's a narrow alley, but I'll do it if I have to. With that, everyone sunk to their knees except one man who tried to run. For a split second, Bela was terrifyingly convinced Hariel would follow through on her threat and grow the dragon to full size. They'd be trampled. Fortunately, nothing of the sort occurred. Instead, a single bright light leapt through the air, colliding with the man where it turned to ropes coiling tight around his limbs. Several yelled, but no one dared move as he fell face first onto the ground. In the chaos, Luke had made his way to the entrance of the tavern and slipped inside. In the meanwhile, Bela rushed over to Reyna and Sir Stefan, unnerved by how quickly and far they'd been separated. Now tell me what the hell's going... But Hariel was cut off mid-word. Sir Stefan, Hariel, help! The desperation in Luke's call made the fine hairs on Bela's arms stand up. Her heart was hammering in her chest as she pulled Reyna along and ran for the door. Hariel had been closest and gone in first, but in her haste she ran right into a pool of blood and toppled backwards. With a grunt, Aemon reacted just in time to catch her. Sir Stefan shuffled past him, mindful of his footing, whilst Reyna and Bela were last to get past the glowing hatchling dragon spitting puffs of smoke from its nostrils. It was acting more like a hound guarding the door than a wild little hatchling. The tavern was in a state of disarray. The benches were toppled over, goblets, bottles, plates and liquids littered the room whilst embers, ash and coal from the fireplace was sprawled across the floor. A man had been left where Hariel had nearly fallen, and after Aemon steadied her, she bent down to check on him. Dead, Hariel said quietly. It looked like people had ran right over him, though what drew Bela's attention was Luke in the dark corner. By an overturned table, the prince sat in a pool of blood, leant over Uncle Lenor's body. 7 hells! Sir Stefan breathed horrified, crossing the room in a few long strides. Reyna gasping for air as if she'd quite forgotten to do so, and swayed alarmingly. Bela's thoughts turned to shambles with little coherency and could only grasp onto her sister, the pretense of steadying Reyna anchoring herself at the same time. No, please no. The 7 have mercy. Luke, Uncle Lenor said, unfocused eyes straining in Luke's direction, something like a chuckle reverberating in his chest.
think I'll be seeing Emma and Joff and Lena.
You'll have to make Lady Lena wait, Sir Lenor, Sir Stefan said, ripping open Lenor's blood-soaked shirt in search of where the wound was. We're getting the maester.
He'll know what to do,
Lucerys insisted, tears in his eyes and choked up.
I'll get Maester Geraldis. Just wait, I'll run. I'll be back before you know it.
But Lucerys' orders for his father to wait with bleeding out were useless.
Oversea. Smoke. Can't fly through. Stupid. Entering it.
Rhaena's arms clutched tight around Bela as they both knew what would happen. She could feel the oncoming inevitability as surely as when they'd watched their mother's body give in too. Uncle Lenor coughed, eyes drooping closed, his last words barely tangible.
A storm caught me, son.
Blood of two, joined as one, ghostly flame and a song of shadows. The priest spoke calmly while Bela rocked the sleeping Prince Viserys in her arms. The little boy peacefully unaware he'd lost both a sister and a father. Prince Viserys would only know their replacements. A sister for sisters. A lord father for a prince father. A lump formed in her stomach as she saw signs of her uncle in Viserys' little face, from his curly silver hair and the bow of his upper lip. Despite the sting of grief, it was easier to focus on the babe than the scene in front of her. Laenor hadn't even had a funeral, but awaiting the sea snake's return for the burial of his son was too long a wait to request, and the excuse had sounded flimsy at best. Matters may not be going the way you expected, but we all have our responsibilities, and marriage is a duty we must all bear to strengthen our house, Bela. Her father had told Bela that morning, breaking the weeks of silence caused by her betrothal at the threshold of his wedding. A duty? That's all this is? Bela asked skeptically. What of Uncle Laenor? House Velaryon will not take this kindly, and Princess Rhaenyra barely stepped off the ship. She lost her daughter and husband mere days ago. Grandmother only flew off on Melee's last eve to inform the sea snake. Why the haste? Is it because you know his grace would be opposed? The king will give his blessing, her father said confidently, failing to clarify any of the real questions. But the concern of fitting the magic through incest is why he broke the betrothal between Aegon and Helena. He's being overly cautious, but he knows at heart such applies only to those without the blood of the dragon. If so, then what of Hariel and Hagrid? Hagrid can hatch any viable dragon egg put in his hand and rear them faster and stronger than a horde of dragon keepers combined, Bale asked, eyes narrowed. Hariel is the Unburned and can speak to the dragons. Both the oldest and the youngest understand her. Norbert, Moondancer, Ebryon, they speak with her. How is she less a dragon than us? She's not, Daemon said simply, brushing his hair back. Despite her unfavorable traits, Hariel's blood runs with pure Valyrian magic. When he didn't explain further, Bela continued uncertainly. And her parents were not kin? Neither were they royals, Daemon said. As Valyrian as she is, her father was only a regular lord. But the strength of our dragon blood and magic is the reason I'm to wed Aegon in the first place, Bela reminded him. As her uncle, and not even a half-uncle, you're too closely related in the eyes of the Seven. My brother will see reason, as a Targaryen, as a king, and as a father. It's only fair, he said softly, meeting her eye, showing the glint of something hard in the depths of his gaze. A daughter for a daughter. Two hearts as embers, forged in 14 fires, a future promised in glass. No, nothing was going right of late. The stars stand witness, the vows spoken through time, of darkness and light. With blood on foreheads and lips, her father accepted the golden goblet from his princess bride and drank whilst the priests finished the Valyrian wedding ceremony.
Bela felt cold as snow fell softly from the clouds above, while Damon and Rhaenyra were bound in fire and blood.